After 14 years, we've got a new government. But what does this mean for property investors? Well, this is something that we're going to be diving into. Welcome back to the channel. And if you're new to the channel, my name is Malkit Purewal, one half of Savoys Properties. We've been in property for 23 years, primarily focusing on HMOs and commercial or residential, as well as new developments. One of the biggest announcements from the new government is a target of 300,000 homes over the course of the term the government's going to be in power. Now that's basically 1.5 million homes. What does this actually mean? Well, to actually now get this target actually achieved, there's going to be some serious changes. There should be some changes to planning, making it easier to get planning for new homes being built. They're going to be looking at brownfield sites, but one of the biggest announcements is they're going to be also looking at greenfield sites, and basically this could be a big impact for the housing market. Now, do I think they can reach these goals? Well, since we've been in property, there's always been housing targets in place until basically Conservative government just abolished it a few years ago. Now, it's very difficult to get these targets met. The reason being, planning is a minefield, and for actually getting new builds approved, councils actually act like planning control. Basically, they don't really like allowing too much new housing to come in. It impacts votes. Hence, we've been focusing on permitted development and prior approval over the past decade. Now, we hope they can actually get this done, but the likelihood is going to be a big challenge unless major changes are announced, making it easy for companies to actually get planning approved. One of the other issues that we find when speaking to new build developers is actually getting sign off on site. So it may be easy to get planning permission in some circumstances, but then you've got conditions to sign off before you can actually start work, and this actually slows the build down. In some cases makes it unaffordable. The other is affordable housing. So previously councils used to build their own housing stock, but then with some changes announced by the government, they want basically developers to actually provide housing to the councils for free under affordable housing. Now, in some cases, developers will, if they go over 9 units, for example, on a site, they'll have to give a percentage of that away for free. So where you may have a site where you can build 14 flats, developers stick at 9 in some cases because they don't have to actually give any away for affordable housing. This actually reduces the number of new housing that actually comes to market and is a hindrance. So this is maybe something the government needs to look at. The other policy is permitted development and the future of it. Now, we think permitted development, prior approval, these rights are here to stay, because if the government has actually set this target for 1.5 million homes over the next 5 years, prior approval and permitted development rights is something they're going to need to look at. Previously, the Conservative government said they were looking at permitted development for converting 1 dwelling into 2 flats. Now, this may be something the Labour government will look at introducing. This is a quick way of introducing multiple units into the housing environment. One of the fears that we actually have is under prior approval at the moment, you don't actually need to give any affordable housing away to the council. This may be something that the Labour government may introduce, and this may make some permitted development prior approval schemes unaffordable and may not get the go-ahead to actually start development. So something to watch out for. The third policy is the Renters' Charter. It was a big talk under the Conservative government and continues to be with the Labour government with abolishing Section 21. Section 21 is basically where you can give notice to a tenant to actually claim your property back. The tenant doesn't necessarily have to leave during this period, and you may have to go to court, but they want to get rid of this altogether. There's a sentiment of no-fault evictions, but in many cases, speaking to landlords, because of tax changes that have come in, interest rates that are high, they're actually looking at exiting the housing market altogether. But this is something that has brought instability to the market, and the Labour government wants to give renters a little bit more security, so it's something to watch out for as a buy-to-let landlord. Personally, as a landlord, you want some control over your own property. By abolishing Section 21, we've already seen that 66 rental properties have been leaving the private rental sector every day for the past couple of years, and if Section 21 abolishment is announced, we tend to see this will end up increasing, leading to limited housing stock and more demand, and I think it's probably going to have a negative impact However, I do see it coming into place. One of the other changes is for tenants to make reasonable changes within the property. This is basically maybe putting pictures and shelves and stuff up. At the moment, alterations are restricted under ASTs, but this may be lightened so tenants can actually make a house feel like a home. For ourselves, we don't really have an issue with it. We don't really like people drilling too many holes and stuff, because if you put shelves in and the other tenants want those removed, they could be costly because you now need to send a handyman in to fill this up, remove this, and it adds time and delays when turning a property around for it to be tenanted again. But if this is something that's announced, it's something that we're gonna have to work with, and it's not going to have a massive impact on our business. The other point is, if a landlord now wants to end a tenancy, they may now have to give 4 months notice. This is currently 2 months notice. And again, it could make buy-to-lets, and in some cases like HMOs, a little bit less attractive to some landlords. But with us, we don't tend to really try to end any tenancies. The only time we actually have tried to do that is where there's been some antisocial behavior issues, or the tenants haven't been paying their rent and it doesn't really make sense for us to actually keep these guys within our properties. Section 8 looks like it will be staying. This is basically when a tenant is in 2 months worth of arrears. A landlord can actually serve a Section 8 notice asking the tenant to bring their arrears back up to date. Otherwise, they will need to leave the property. If the tenant doesn't leave, then you can then apply to a court for an eviction notice. Now, thankfully, this sounds like it's going to stay in place, because this is a very important tool that some landlords need to use when a tenant is in arrears. Now, if this was to be removed, it would have a massive impact and make basically the private rented sector unattractable to landlords and companies to actually invest in, because it removes any right for a landlord to claim a property back. So we're grateful that this sounds like it's going to actually stay in place, but again, we'll keep you posted on this. There's been talk that service accommodation, if you're operating in this industry, will need to be licensed. Now, I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing, because with HMOs, and in some cases there's some selective licensing up and down the country, if you're renting a property out, you need to get some licensing. And this tends to ensure that you have the relevant gas cert, electrical certs, fire safety certs, fire risk assessments and stuff in place to ensure that the property is safe for it to be rented in the private rented sector. At the moment, service accommodation has grown massively over the last 5 years and doesn't actually need to be licensed, but it may not be a bad thing, because it'll get rid of some unregulated landlords that operate within the industry. Labour has rejected rent controls. This was something that's been pushed by London Mayor Sadiq Khan. He believed that we needed rent caps in London and across the UK, but rent, in our opinion, is always dictated by supply and demand. Over the 2 decades we've been operating in the industry, if there was low demand for a property, we'd lower the rent, and when the demand was actually up, we'll look at adjusting it a little bit upwards. Now, by bringing in rent control would actually reduce the attractiveness for people to enter the rental market. So we're actually glad that that's not going to be impacted by the new government. The Leas Old Reform Act. So this is something that's been in discussion for many years. So as a leaseholder, it can be unfair if your mortgage now falls below 80 years with the marriage value that's actually there. You could have to pay a big split to the landlord to actually get your lease extended. In many cases, lenders will not lend to you if your lease is below 80 years. This is something that leaseholders felt ransom to by the freeholder, and we expect to have some changes that come in to make it a little bit more attractive for leaseholders. And with the developments that are going on at the moment, the majority of them are flats, so we only expect to see leaseholders increase, and I think there needs to be a fairer system than is currently out there. EPC is now back on the agenda. You may have noticed the previous Conservative government scrapped the EPC targets, and we actually did a few posts and reels on this where we thought, well, when the new government comes in, if it changes, which now it has, they'll actually bring in these targets. So they're saying that by 2030, you need a minimum C rating to rent out a property. This is now going to put pressure on landlords if this now comes in place, because some of the properties may not be economically viable to actually make these changes. So if you're now looking at purchasing a property, see the EPC currently on the property, see what recommendations it says, if it's below a C rating that you need to implement to try to get these in place. And it's something that we'll be taking into account when looking at our deals also. There's been talk of mortgage guarantee scheme. This is basically where a buyer, first-time buyer, only puts down a 5% deposit to actually get on the housing ladder, but there's no further details on this yet. This is something that we think is vital, because to have a vibrant housing market, you need people at the bottom end of the spectrum as well as the ones at the top and in the middle. And first-time buyers actually help the economy massively, because obviously if you're buying a new property now, you're going to need a bed, sofa, potentially carpets and other appliances. So it actually helps boost the economy. So this is something that we feel strongly with, that you need first-time buyers in any housing market. But we'll be keeping a strong eye on what's going on within this, and any changes will keep you updated. Stability for corporation tax. Now, the Labour government's announced that they're not looking at pushing up corporation tax. This basically gives some reassurances to people such as ourselves that hold properties within limited companies, that the corporation rate isn't going to rise, and we've seen it rise during the 14 years that Conservative government has been in power. So it gives us some stability there and gives us the confidence to look at expanding our portfolios. Now, if you found that video useful, we'll actually be keeping you posted on any changes that are going to be happening within the housing market. We'll be producing some reels and other YouTube videos, keeping you guys up to date with any changes within the market. We've actually now got a community of over 700 property investors where you can ask your questions to us and other property investors within the community. All you now need to do is have a look in the description for the link.